In this video, we're going to have a look at the closing argument presented by the defense attorney for Jennifer Crumbley, who's been charged with 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter. In November of 2021, Crumbley's 15-year-old son, Ethan, killed 4 students and injured 7 people in his high school. And the state is alleging that Jennifer Crumbley should have done something to prevent that and bringing out claims that the gun he used was not secured and was given to him as a gift, and that he had cried out for help, and those cries went unheard. I'm not going to get into all the meat of that. There's plenty of stuff out there on this case, including the full trial if you want to go watch it. The defense's closing was quite colorful. Would you agree with that? Colorful?
I
Will?
mean, there's a stack of colorful papers right there on the desk behind her, so yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, absolutely. She's gotten a lot of hate throughout this trial and a lot of shade thrown on her for her unconventional ways, we might say. But this closing is just a sight to behold. So we're going to kind of go through there and look at it from maybe a strategic standpoint. And Will's going to help us with the legal aspects because some say that a lot of the stuff she's doing in here is a kind of a no-no, but we'll see. So with that, Will, you ready to take a look?
Yeah, why don't you roll the footage and let's see what we got.
Now, during jury selection, it felt like the prosecutor was asking you questions and giving more of a campaign speech than a jury selection proceeding. At the end of the day,
Now look, that first one, and I've clipped out the things that we wanted to look at here, but that first one, the reason that stuck out to me was, I mean, that looks like the first shot at the prosecution.
Definitely a shot across the bow.
It sounds to me like what she's saying is the prosecutor is this is a campaign thing. It's not about justice. Isn't that a foul of some sort or no?
So I think what for me is just a little uncomfortable about her statement personally is it gets into the prosecutor, the individual, right? So she's saying, "Oh, she's making a campaign speech." It makes it about the person. And if she wants to say this case, these charges are trumped up, this case, they're trying to make an example, or they're overreaching or something like that, then you're kind of staying more true to the heart of the issue that's in front of the jury, right? Whether this is appropriately charged, whether they've proven their case. But then when you kind of veer off from that into this, well, it's a campaign speech by the prosecutor, this particular individual. I think it kind of, yeah, it's kind of treading into this territory where it almost becomes more of like a personal attack, which generally those, yeah, that's not that's a party foul. We don't do that.
That's a good point. That's a seems like a personal thing because it really does. All right, let's keep going.
the only judge, although Miss McDonald mentioned she's been a judge and was a judge several times during her jury selection, the only judge in this courtroom that matters is Judge Matthews. And the only other people whose judgment matters are the 12 of you who will collectively decide this case. The rest of us don't matter. My opinion doesn't matter. Ms. McDonald's doesn't matter. The opinions of everyone in this audience doesn't matter. The media and all of the people who think they know everything behind keyboards at home commenting about what they think the evidence in this case has shown. Evidently,
She talking about you there, Bob?
I guess so. I mean, she looked right at me into that camera. I picked up a couple things there though, and that's one I definitely wanna talk about, but the first thing that, I had to go back and listen to, like, 3 times, she takes another shot at the prosecutor there saying, during jury selection, she told you however many times that, she used to be a judge.
Yeah, I
Another
think
one of those personal shots.
yeah, yeah, again, it seems like there's definitely some bad blood there, and what I think about it is, okay, put aside for a second that maybe there's some questions about how, on the level that is, but even more problematic is how does that play with the jury, right? Instead of talking to them and arguing them, they've been watching this case for how long this trial's been going on, and now you've got I think her closing argument was, what, an hour and a half long, something like that, maybe a little longer?
Yes, it was painful.
Yeah, and so, who wants to sit and listen to somebody talk for an hour and a half? There's not many people that enjoy that. And so anything that you're saying that's sort of unnecessary, you're just kind of giving the jury fodder. And then again, it almost turns into this like just a personal grudge match between these two individuals rather than making it about what it should be about, which is the merits of the case, right? That's what I don't like about it. I don't think it plays well, and I think it, jurors, they're there to do a job, and they're getting their per diem of like usually $40 a day, and they're sequestered, and I mean it's serious work, it's service, it's important, and so they don't want you to waste their time, and so when you get into all this other stuff that's just kind of sort of makes you feel good because you're taking shots at the other side. It might make you feel good in the moment, but I don't think it's a good strategy, and I don't like it
Well, that's what I was
personally.
gonna say was, is there a d is it that she's doing it because it makes her feel good and it's the personal bad blood, or is it a strategy that she's trying to weave this, thought of, look at the evil prosecutor throughout her whole closing, and I guess we kinda have to see more to say that, but it's a theme that keeps coming up, so I'll be honest, I don't know, and I think I told you this already, but I haven't figured out yet whether this defense attorney is an unhinged nut or an absolute genius.
I mean, maybe she's both, and at the end of the day, the jury's verdict is really going to be what decides it. People like you and me, we can sit back and we can philosophize and comment on everything she does, and really, what are the jury? What How did the jury take it? What do they do with it? That's going to be what ultimately determines whether she was successful or not.
Well, that's true, but this is interesting to me because this is the only place outside of TV that I've quite seen a closing like this. And something else from a kinda, I don't know what you people call it, rules or whatnot. She introduces the idea and even looks right there at the camera and talks about the media and the keyboard warriors with all their opinions.
Hmm.
And so here's what I don't get. The jurors are told every single day, every time they leave the courtroom, they're told by the judge, don't, if you see anything about this case on social media, don't look at it, don't watch it, don't watch the news. You, you get everything you need from inside this courtroom. Don't engage with that stuff. And then you have an attorney getting up in the closing, basically teasing the jury with, oh, there's a lot of stuff out there.
Yeah, it's interesting because she doesn't comment on the content of what people are saying, but you could make an inference based on her comment about what they're saying, uh, and something we're going to see throughout this, right, is a theme of the prosecution there. I think that would be a good reason to ask the judge, like, hey, can we approach and to talk about that, and I'm sure typically, I'll just say as a general rule, when an attorney's giving either opening statements or their closing argument, objections are generally disfavored, right? You want to try to give the other side room to make their argument, to present their case, and to not
That doesn't
interrupt.
mean they can say anything they want.
Exactly, right, there's a limit to that. So there is some sort of, you try to give some leeway, if they're a little off. But at the end of the day, objections, that's how you take care of things. That's how you preserve errors, and that's how you deal with issues that are, um, beyond the rules of procedure, beyond the rules of, ethical rules, or all these sorts of things. So I'm a little surprised that that didn't draw an objection, especially knowing, I think, what we were maybe just a couple minutes, if that, into her closing when that comes up. And, um,
Oh, yeah.
knowing there's going to be a lot more to maybe sort of set the tone. Hey, judge, will you please reel her in? We don't think this is appropriate.
Yeah. Speaking of more,
There's a TikTok channel of me saying I'm sorry through this whole trial. I saw
Yeah, bingo, right?
I mean, so that to me kinda sounds like it's personal to her, like she's personally offended, and that's why she's bringing up the social media stuff.
Yeah, and I'd be interested because I'm just one guy. Like when I hear that stuff, I do think it's sort of, she makes a lot of this about herself, which is interesting. That might be part of her strategy, is she might be seeing that the folks online are not resonating with her, or they think a certain way about her. And it sounds like, from what she's saying, they don't, they they think she says sorry too much, and they don't really care for some of her antics. And so maybe she's taking that feedback and just trying to hit it squarely with the jury. But instead of coming up and saying, hey, you might think I say sorry too much, which sounds weird, she's finding a way to weave that in. And ultimately, I think at some point later on, and I don't know if you have this in the clips or not, but she does at one point kind of say, hey, And I think this is a good tactic for any defense attorney or really anybody, any attorney representing a party on either side to say, "Hey, listen, if I've offended you or upset you or annoyed you, if something I say or the way I talk, if you don't like that, hold it against me, but please don't hold it against my client. It's not their fault that I'm an obnoxious person. So please judge the case based on the evidence and based on, what my client, where they are in this, not how you perceive me." Um,
Well,
and
I
so
agree. I think every attorney should do that in their closing.
Yeah, and so I think some of this maybe to try to give her sort of the benefit of the doubt and thinking about her strategy and what she's doing here, it might be kind of building that up with, well, I gotten all this feedback from the internet, from TikTok apparently about what annoys people about me. So let me bring some of that up. But that's playing devil's advocate. I think, at least when I watched it the first time, my thought was like your thought, which was, wow, like you seem like you're really upset about this and you're kind of clapping back at the TikTokers through the trial, which that's not a great look. Hopefully that's not the case, but it did sort of feel that way.
Right, and speaking of color, have a look at these file folders. All I know from all of these Post-it notes in here is that these 2 near the top, there's 2 pages somewhere near the top there with the pink Post-its and the hand-drawn exclamation marks. Those must be really important pieces of
Uh,
paper.
I was gonna ask if that's what that was.
Yeah,
Everybody's
there
got their
was
system, you know.
well, look, there was an exchange, and I forget who it was by, but there was an exchange at one point during the trial where her stack of folders and papers fell over.
Oh,
And that got pointed out. I don't remember who it was, whether it was a judge or prosecutor. Somebody pointed out, like, "Hey," and she did make reference to that in this closing, but I didn't
yeah.
include that clip.
Yeah, hang on a second. So to this point, just about I think maybe during her closing, she mentions another Leaning Tower of Pisa incident. I think she says
That's what
that.
she's talking about.
And what kills me about this,
And then 'cause she says, "I learned my lesson," or something to that effect.
well, all right. So let me just say, when I was in law school, they taught us that if you're ever going to have a bunch of papers, because you need to have them in court, which happens, right? They should be securely fastened in some sort of a binder so that her Leaning Tower of Pisa incident it doesn't occur. And if it does, maybe the binder falls off, but all of your papers are still in their proper place and you can keep track of them. But this, what I see here, honestly, that gives me anxiety just looking at that. I gotta believe putting all that up there next to her client like that, it's part of a show. I'm assuming she made some arguments about, and I remember in this, right, there's a talk about the evidence and how much of whatever there is. And so I think this is just one of those visual presentations of look, look at all of this. And because realistically, there's no practical reason that I can think of to have that much paper with that much posted notes in that format just sitting on counsel table like that. But to each their own. Yeah.
Exactly, and she makes a point sometimes, when she's up there questioning or closing or whatever, to spend some time hunting for a particular piece of paper. And again, I think, that may not be ineptness, if that's a word. I think it might be part of the show of, "Look, the
Mhm.
state has dumped all this evidence on us, and they cherry-picked 5 things that we have to find the needle in the haystack." I think it's a whole visual psychological thing, personally. I could be
Little,
wrong.
yeah, a little dog and pony show. I think you're right.
Yeah, alright, let's go a little bit.
A meme about a week ago that said, I'm trying to be a mom, trying to get exercised, stay hydrated, get enough sleep, text everyone back, and not lose my shit. And I've got to be honest, as a mom, a working mom, on most days, I'm lucky if I'm fit for human contact. I'm lucky if I've taken a true shower and didn't just grab a handful of wipes and scrub off the best I can on my way running out the door, putting on my makeup as I drive to court in my car. Because my life is not perfect and no one's is.
Oh, I have so
And
much here.
during this
I have so much, so many things. First of all, this is why I could never be a lawyer, because if I'm this prosecutor sitting here, when she gets to that shower comment about the baby wipes, I'm gonna say, "Excuse me, your honor, can we move that podium further away from me?"
uh,
And that probably wouldn't go over well, I'm guessing.
yeah,
But
probably not.
Yeah, I mean, that's a little scary. That's one thing that kinda stood out to me. Quoting a meme is kinda interesting, but then again, she quoted Taylor Swift in her opening argument, and
Hey.
then she makes a flashback reference to that in at the end of this, which I didn't include that clip, but she refers to the Band-Aid, which is, of course, a reference to her opening. So, that tells me there's some skill here because that's kind of an important memory presentation thing is to have something at the very end that you don't really say, just like I told you in the beginning, you just provide that thing that relates, and then the audience, when they hear that and they make the connection, they kind of feel jazzed up about making the connection.
Mhm.
Now here's
Yeah.
the other thing, and I want to hear everything you got to say, but I'll forget because I'm airheaded. Then when she says about putting on my makeup in the car while I'm driving to court. Now look, I don't put on makeup while I'm driving to court, but, I have been known many, many years ago, I'm eating a sandwich and shifting gears and talking on the phone and, probably not a good idea. So I know life happens when you're in a hurry and you're trying to do things, but I've just never seen a lawyer, I don't think, get up there in a closing and, like, admit to I mean, I know it sounds petty because what would it be? Distracted driving? She's up there telling us this, and let me take a real stretch for you. A month from now, she's in a car accident one morning and runs over a pedestrian. This is not gonna go well, is it?
Yeah. The
I
plaintiff's
know that's an
attorney.
extreme reach, but it was bizarre to me.
Yeah, so, I get what she's doing, right? She's trying to say, "Hey, I'm this attorney, and you should trust me, and you should think that I'm special because I'm an attorney, and I'm telling you that I'm no different than my client. My client and I, we're more alike than we're dissimilar. Don't view her in a way that, she's some sort of, dirty cast off, lesser than person. We're the same." I will say the use of the meme, I think that's smart. These are real people. These jurors, they're pulled out of the public, and just like you or me or anybody else, right? They want you to tell them a story. They want you to connect things for them, and they want to understand. And the last thing you want to do is just jump in and kind of speak over them with boring stuff they've been listening to for the last couple of weeks. Like, all right, bring it home. Make it relatable. Make it so that they get what you're trying to argue. So I thought that was good.
Fair
The
enough, fair enough.
distracted driving. I mean, yeah, you're right. It was an interesting thing, but at the same time, yeah, I think that's probably more common. I think out of the ladies that I know, I bet most of them have at least one time in the last month reapplied or put on makeup while driving in the car. I personally, I mean, that's a struggle I don't have to deal with, thankfully. Although for everybody else, it'd probably be better if I did.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, same here.
but the one thing about this that really kind of just took me back a little was her. Uh, sometimes I rarely get to take a real shower, and I thought that was wow. That's a little TMI there, but she's trying to sell this point. She's trying to say, hey, I'm no different. My client and I, we're the same person. So she's trying to sort of tie that in, using some extreme examples to get there. I think so. I think that's what she's up to. I can understand it. But the bird bath or baby white bath thing, that was the one that I just thought, all right, okay,
Right, could we
interesting.
have some mystery between us?
Yeah. Uh,
Trial, you may have concluded that you don't like me, that you hate me. That's fine. I
Here comes your line.
am just asking that your opinions about me as a person, and if you're one of the people who plans to make a TikTok about me, that you won't hold those opinions against Jennifer Crumbley. Now, when I
Okay, I think she was doing great right until she sorta squirmed and said, "To the jury."
yeah.
Now, if you're one of those people that plans to make a TikTok isn't that, like, antagonizing the jury?
So what I did, honestly, that struck me as she had a plan to make that pitch and then sort of ad libbed that part where she kind of paused and thought, and then it was almost that like, do I? Yeah, I'm gonna do it. Okay. Yeah, if you're one of those TikTok people, I mean, that really, I think that kind of lends itself to the notion that she really feels some kind of way about these
It's
people
personal.
making TikToks. Yeah, personal for sure. But
But
I
at the
agree
same
with you.
time, maybe that is part of the strategy to kind of push these jurors to look. They're getting closing arguments on a Friday afternoon, and then they're going to come back on Monday, so they got
Mhm.
all weekend to go, to stay away from social media. So does this sort of entice them to, geez, what are these TikToks she's talking about?
And yeah, and that's another thing with the state where I would have been inclined to object and ask to approach and talk with the judge about, listen, we already know it's hard enough for people to stay off social media or to not read the news or search these cases without adding to that by pointing out like, oh yeah, there's all these keyboard warriors and oh, they're making TikToks about me. And well, I hope you're not going to be one of those people that makes a TikTok about me. But if you are, I hope you won't hold it against my client. I mean, it's inviting them, or if nothing else, kind of tempting or teasing them to go look out at for this stuff that's out there.
Right. There's something really interesting in your top left drawer next to your refrigerator. Don't look at it.
Right.
Tell me
Yeah.
how that works.
Yeah.
Okay.
Took on this case pretty early on. I realized I am Jennifer Crumbley and I could be here accused and sitting in her spot very easily. Now, in my house, we don't have guns. I don't have guns, but I do have children.
Okay. Tell me if I messed this up, but I think this is what they call the what is it? The golden rule argument of trying to get the jury to put themselves in the defendant's shoes and say, look, the state could come after you too for this. Isn't that pretty much what she's doing here by saying I could be Jennifer Crumley?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? So you're correct. Golden rule is exactly what you said. So let's take it out of this context and make it a little less this way. So there's a case, and let's say it's a car accident case where plaintiff is asking for $10 million because it's really bad, and then I argue to the jury. I mean, imagine the defendant, they're asking for 10 million. Imagine if you were the defendant, they're asking for $10 million. Like that's gonna, if you're in his shoes, that's gonna bankrupt him, his life, whatever, whatever. Like, how would you feel if that was you? Any of those kind of arguments, right? Those are golden rule arguments, generally impermissible, generally frowned upon, or highly frowned upon. And I did find there's an interesting, because this case, I believe, isn't it taking place in Michigan?
Yes.
Yeah, so I found this interesting little trial practice article called "Over the Top" by Brian Benner and Ronald Carlson, violating the law of closing argument. And we'll have to link it up somehow in the comments or details or whatever. Um, and it goes through this list of all these issues that you run into that are not okay, and personal beliefs of counsel, argument outside the record, golden rule arguments, name calling, vouching, which we can talk about that some.
Oh, there's
Um,
some name calling in here too.
and that stuff early on about the prosecutor, I think that was might
Oh
not
no,
have
there's
been
flat out name calling in here.
right. Yeah, I don't think early on it wasn't, but and I know
Not yet.
later on, but early on, even though it wasn't flat out name calling, it's akin to name calling because you're pretty much trying to disparage the character of the prosecutor or paint her or him in a negative way. But yeah, so back to this golden rule thing. Yeah, I do think that's what she's kind of inviting this quasi golden rule slash. She's trying to make it out about herself. It's just very unorthodox, I would say. And again, maybe the jury comes back and they acquit, or she gets a hung jury, and then at the end of the day, who knows what? I don't know how Michigan would handle this kind of stuff if they would even there would even be any sort of ethical issue or thing filed against her or anything like that. I don't know. But she strikes me as the type of attorney, if you're willing to go in and make these kind of arguments and do these kind of things, that she's in there to try to win, and in her mind, in her estimation, this is the best thing she can do to win the case for her client. So she's just putting it all out there.
Yeah, I mean, well, she advertises on her website that she does things differently.
I
I
did
think that's
see
the
that.
phrasing
Yeah.
she uses. Is that the phrase she used?
It's if that's not it, it's along those lines that she's not your typical. If you're looking for a standard defense lawyer, she ain't it.
Yeah,
So
that's for sure. Alright.
Black on my counter. with big knives that I use when I cook, and I enjoy cooking. And at the end of the day, my kids could just as easily grab a knife without me knowing it and without me having it on my radar and walk out the door of my house and go play with their kids, the other kids on my block. Granted, they live farther down my block because I'm in the middle of nowhere. And my son could kill somebody with my butcher block knife that I would have never expected to happen. And
By telling us that story, isn't she kinda telling us that's a foreseeable thing?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? So you got that element of it. You also have the element of like she's literally just creating a hypothetical that has nothing to do with anything about the case, honestly. I mean, it's so far left field of, well, your son isn't on trial. You're not on trial. The case isn't about what your son did. There's no knife involved in this case. Like all of it is just out there. And this is where, like you said, she's either some kind of genius or this is terrible. Personally, I'm not a fan. I like the idea of, I think in this case, there's enough questions about, clearly the state in this case has tried to kind of apply the law in a way that it's maybe not typically applied in. Doesn't mean it doesn't apply. It doesn't mean these facts don't fit this particular crime, but it's not what you might typically think of. And so, in those kind of situations, you have plenty of room to sort of navigate that within the facts of the case. And I think she has that here. There's opportunity to, and later on, I think there are some points where she makes some halfway decent to actually good arguments about why the jury should question whether the state's met the burden in this case based on these facts. That's what closing arguments for. That's not we're just talking about being an argument outside the record. Like, what does her son a butcher block? She could be held liable. What does that have to do with anything? It has nothing to do with anything. It's just out there.
Well,
So
we've only just begun to hear about, this attorney Shannon Smith's personal life as it will come up again and again here.
in the middle of nowhere, and my son could kill somebody with my butcher block knife that I would have never expected to happen. And if you saw the text messages that my husband and I exchanged on a daily basis throughout this past year and even years before, it would be so easy for me to be in her seat. My son.
Right?
yeah, I mean, maybe they should subpoena her cell phone records, I guess.
Well, actually, they have text messages between her and her client.
Oh,
Yeah, I don't know if that's even brought up in here, but or if I included it in the clips.
I don't remember hearing that in the closing, but that's interesting. So they've subpoenaed her cell phone records with her
I don't
client?
know that it was her cell phone records, it might have been the client's cell phone records,
Oh,
but,
I see.
they do introduce text messages between them while she was.
When they were on the run?
Yeah,
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, interesting. Well,
alright.
maybe they need to subpoena more of those records.
Online talking to a bunch of people as he's playing a lot of video games. Even though he has a cell phone, I don't go through it and look at his messages every day. And as he gets older, I do know he's interested in girls. If he starts receiving nude pictures of a girl on the cell phone I own, but let him use and gave him for his birthday when he turned 11, should I be held accountable for receiving child pornography if a girl sexts him over some inappropriate pictures? If my son decides he's going to send some pictures back and takes a nude picture of his bits and pieces, that's a 20-year felony. Am I then responsible because he sent a picture of his penis over to some girl? So not only taking the picture, a 20-year felony, but then we've got a 7-year felony for sending it over. Can every parent really be responsible for everything their children do?
That all sounded to me, aside from being very uncomfortable with the bits and pieces and the gesturing toward the crotch, that all sounded to me like jury nullification.
It certainly feels like she's trying to get as close to making that argument as she can without making it, which generally jury instructions that'll be given by the court say Like, that's not okay. You can't do that. You can't argue jury nullification. And so she's trying to, I think you're right. I think she's trying to find a clever way to plant the seed without openly walking right up and making that argument. Yeah, bits and pieces. And I thought, oh, that's different. And then to go from bits and pieces to, all right, well, we're going to throw it all out there. It's interesting.
Yeah, and then I was irritated by the lawyer jargon of the 20-year felony and the 7-year felony and all that, because to jurors and most normal people in the world, that's some kind of strange language, and that's what leads me to the point that was jury nullification is what she's going for. She's trying to tell the jury whether the law it says this or not, whether the facts show this or not, put this woman in jail for this, and you could be next.
Hmm.
And I think it might be because I was also bothered by, like, why is she talking about the kids sexting each other? Like, what does that have to do with was there some element of that? And there wasn't in this case, but I think maybe it was one of those creative things to say, and it could be over everything. Your kid
Hmm.
doesn't have to kill somebody. What if they just do this thing? You could still go to prison. Just
Yeah.
thinking out loud.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. I 100% I agree. But the reality is, and I've seen some of the keyboard warriors talking about this case, and especially some that have been around for a while, have said, well, back in my day, if when I was a kid and I was out and I was playing and I, broke the neighbor's window with a baseball, I mean, at the end of the day, my parents were going to be on the hook to take care of that, right? Like, it wasn't like, sometimes our kids' actions have consequences that affect parents. That's the way society works. Not saying they should always, and of course, this is a case where it is not unusual, but we're looking at something that is newer that maybe hasn't been fully tested and figured out, and honestly would vary case by case, right? If you take the two extremes, you have somebody who is the upstanding, responsible gun owner who keeps their gun locked up and it's in a case that's locked, it's in a safe that's locked or whatever. If they have a teenager who breaks into the gun safe, physically breaks it open, breaks into the case where the gun is, and they take the gun and they go somewhere and they hurt somebody with it, and the parents have no idea. There's no history of mental illness. There's no red flags. There's literally nothing to suggest that anything like that would ever happen. And you take that case and you put it up against a case where you have a teenager, the same teenager, but now maybe they have had some mental health issues, and they do have a history of maybe like violent outbursts, and maybe they've actually tried to attack or hurt people in the past with knives or other handheld weapons. And then you have a gun that you keep laying on the kitchen counter fully loaded, and you keep your ammunition in the garage where anybody can get it, and maybe they make a comment to you about, oh, if so and so at school says this again, I'm going to go shoot it up. At that point, I think we would all agree that's a very different set of facts and a very different case, and we would all feel very differently about the liability that should be imposed on those two parents, those two sets of parents, based on the facts. Which, to me, that's the thing here. We need to be arguing the facts of this case, not how many big knives the defense attorney has on her butcher block in her kitchen, and not what happens when her 11-year-old that she gave a phone to, which we could talk about that, whether he does illegal things with that, whether she should be held responsible for that. She's not on trial. Her kid's not on trial. This woman is on trial for what her son did. That's what we should be talking about.
It seems like the defense is taking the approach that, okay, everybody thinks this woman is a bad mother and drop the ball.
Hmm.
So my argument is going to be that I'm a high functioning individual and I'm a worse mother than she is. And I could be sitting in that spot too, facing 60 years in prison. And I guarantee you, she wants to get the jury to be thinking, some of those jurors are probably the kinds of folks who their kids don't have cell phones at all. But I'm sure there's some jurors on there that their kids have cell phones and do exactly what this woman is saying, kind of do
Hmm.
whatever they do. There's people parent differently, and there's all
Yeah.
different. And I bet she's hoping to reach the couple that are more scattered in life, like she's claiming herself to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
So
And
this
well, sorry, I was say that just goes back to your point though. At the end of the day, what she's doing is she's not terrible. She's just like me. I'm an attorney. I'm a decent human being. And so disregard the facts and just acquit her because you don't want to be in the same seat she's in because you're a busy parent. I think, which to me, like you said, boils back down to it's essentially a form of jury nullification. Ignore the facts and let her go.
felony, but then we've got a 7-year felony for sending it over. Can every parent really be responsible for everything their children do? So this case is a very dangerous one for parents out there. It just is. And it is one of the first of its kind.
And right now, I think we've gotten to the climax of the jury nullification, and she is making this point that she's been
Mhm.
building up to and she's going to follow through on, which is, and I don't disagree with her. I mean, what piqued my interest about this case in the first case was, hmm, we're going to hold a parent responsible for a kid that carried out a school shooting. Uh, In a way, I think that's good. In another way, I think that's terrifying.
Mhm.
But I think and that's what she's seems like what she's doing with the jury is saying, and this is probably a pretty typical defense strategy, like, where does that end then? If we're
Mhm.
opening that door, and now you're gonna be responsible for every single thing your kid does, whether you knew about it or not.
Yeah, it's that slippery slope argument, right? Well, if we hold her liable for this, where does it end? You're liable for everything your kid does. If you can hold her accountable, or if you hold her liable, if you find her guilty here, then game on. They
Great.
can prosecute anybody for anything.
Yeah, and let me flash back to what you just said. Oh my gosh, well, if my kid sends a picture of his bits and pieces, and then some other kid sends him a picture of their cash and prizes, and then he sends one back with twig and berries, then right.
Bingo.
Oh, I have plenty of euphemisms for genitalia. Trust me.
When Brian Maloche testified, another example came about.
Should interrupt here and say that Brian Maloche was a high school friend of the defendant who we learned in this trial the defendant has been having an affair with, and he testified about some things. The state called him as a witness, so that's who Brian Maloche is.
Prosecution had him testify that Mrs. Crumbley said to delete his messages, clear your cache. And I'm so thankful that the rest of the world sent me emails that I don't know how to pronounce cache, because now I do.
Wait, what? Help me. Am I missing something?
Um, Yeah, so the deal here is that the prosecution's argument was in these text messages that the defendant was telling this Brian dude, basically to delete all his history, his messages and everything. And what the defense is arguing is no, at that particular point, um, the defendant was trying to make sure her son's Facebook page had been taken down. Brian was checking that and saying like, no, it's still up. And she was telling him, clear your cache or cache, whatever you want to call it, meaning, your internet, your web cookies and whatnot,
Mhm.
and your cache, all the things that are stored. It's not even your history. It's the things that are stored to make web pages load faster so that you're getting the most recent version of that web page. So that's her argument is the prosecution was saying that she was directing him to delete evidence, messages and whatnot. And he later understood that what she was trying to get him to do was make sure he was looking at the most recent Facebook page to see if it was there.
Yeah, but my hang up is not any of that. My hang up is I have never heard it referred to as a cachet, and now she seems to be wanting to say that that's the correct pronunciation. I've always
Yeah, well, that's a debate. Some people call it cache, some call it cache because it's spelled weird and got that freaking E on the end.
yeah, I just always thought it was your browser cache, but okay. Well, people hit us up in the comments. Which one is it? Is it cache or cache?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've always called it a cache, and maybe that's wrong, but
I've always called it a
yeah, but
cache.
this is another is another point that she seems to be personally offended by the internet. And
Right. And
that's
yeah.
fine to feel that way if she wants to waste her time on that, but why are you discussing it during the closing?
Well, I
This is
would
the
think,
client closing, not your speech time.
yeah, and what kind of sort of surprised me about this, especially as it goes on, and it seems more and more like it's just she's personally offended by the interwebs. As an attorney, you should generally have thick skin. As a criminal defense attorney, usually, I mean, most of the ones that I know, they're fairly thick-skinned people. And looking at her website, I think she focuses on a particular clientele that I would think she would have developed a pretty thick skin. So it surprises me that, and that's what makes me wonder if there's some strategy to this that I just haven't picked up on, or maybe this is coming across differently to me. But it is just weird that she's so bothered by what people on TikTok are saying about um, her pronunciation of words and how many times she says she's sorry. Like, okay, people are going to have opinions, and some are right and some are wrong, and you just kind of have to roll with it.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't feel like the closing argument is the place to put it. I think she could go make her own TikToks and YouTube videos and probably make a fortune and become super famous because there are plenty of people that love this attorney and think she's doing a bang up job. And
Right.
I'm sure there would be people that would take the fact that she's rolling with it and owning her own personality and putting it out there. She'd be getting the views.
Yeah,
I'm
for
sure of
sure.
it.
That I don't know how to pronounce cachet because now I do.
Oh, we did that.
Having Amanda Holland come in, a coworker who's not a friend to Jennifer Crumbley and has been interviewed by law enforcement to tell you her advice on she should go have a mother Sunday with her teenager, so irrelevant when she's faced with raising toddlers every day. When I heard her advice, I thought, yeah, right. I have 3 teenagers. I almost have a 4th. And personally, not only would they rather do anything else than spend a day with me, I'd rather do anything else.
So maybe we're not getting a Mother of the Year award.
Yeah, I mean, at least she's honest though, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't you're right. She is being honest, and I think she'll tell us a little bit more about that here in a minute, but something else that, jumped out at me there from reading the rules that you people have is she's there telling you that I mean, she can argue, I guess, about something a witness says. She does it in a pretty condescending way, but then she tells you the first thing I thought, I didn't think that's
Mhm.
how that was supposed to work.
Yeah, that's kinda you don't wanna get into your own personal opinions, personal, beliefs. That's a no-no, and you also have to be careful, when we get into vouching, right, about, "Oh, well, you can trust this witness because I trust this witness," and I know she didn't say that, but I
Yeah, she's
in that
doing the exact opposite.
right, and that's right, and in that same vein, you're in that territory though, right, of you're putting your own spin on it. So that is generally, in my understanding and experience, that is not something you want to do in a closing argument.
And again, she's bringing it right back to her and her life and her kids and her situation.
Right. Yeah, I'm with you. I think, and I know. So this is clipped. So this isn't overall where she is in the closing, but um, you know, to this point, wherever it is, we've heard very little about the defendant, about the elements, about anything that to me is actually germane or relevant to this case.
Well, in fairness, I did do what she accuses the prosecution of doing and cherry picked out these interesting parts that were worthy of discussion. So I'm sure there was mention of more salient elements that I've not included in here.
I almost have a 4th. And personally, not only would they rather do anything else than spend a day with me, I'd rather do anything else. And part of what made me realize I could be in Mrs. Crumbly's shoes is I sent texts to my husband saying, our daughter is a psycho today. On the way to school last week, she's crying. She doesn't have people to sit with at lunch. I texted him, she's a nutcase. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to handle this. I don't have time for this. My other daughter is complaining about her lights flickering in her room. I texted my husband, this sounds like a case. The start of a case. My husband works for my office. He's actually my office manager, so he knows about the case. He went in her room and figured out in 5 minutes it's because when she flips her blow dryer on, one of our plugs makes the lights flicker. So this ghost that you would read about in my text messages, which by the way, I did not respond to, despite the fact that it's on our 6-person group chat, would be taken out of context and make me look like I don't really care that my daughter is crazy.
Okay, I got to give it to her on this one, even though I'm kind of sick of hearing about her life. It does, it certainly makes me think if you were to take a couple of my text messages in isolation, holy crap.
This comes back to my point that I tell all my friends, right? Be careful what you put in writing. Don't put things in writing you don't need to put in writing. Good grief, Bob. I've told you this, but
I don't know. And I imagine there's parents out there that would never do this, but I imagine there are plenty of parents that I can absolutely relate to her about referring to your kid as being a nutcase today or not, and meaning it with all the love in the world. Just, we're not using social worker terminology, I guess, to phrase it.
you just need to think about whether you want to be reading that in your deposition. That's all.
But still, I feel like we're getting to know too much here. And what was the point of us knowing that her husband works the law firm? Like, I don't care.
So, okay, I think I know what happened there. I think, she starts to tell this story about this stuff with Casper or whatever. And then she's like, I told my husband we're going to have a case. It's like this case. And I think she was worried about, at least maybe not that it really matters for the jury, but wait a second. So she talks to her husband about cases when there's attorney-client privilege. Like, how's that work? That would
Okay,
be,
that makes sense.
yeah, that'd be a big no-no. But if he works in the office, then he's more than likely, then it would make sense that if he's working in a capacity that he's privy to that information, then they can discuss things about the case. So,
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. Also, if she hadn't made that clarification, I might be sitting here saying, what does she mean? She's going to catch a case? She's going to kill the kid? Is that what
well,
she's saying?
she knows these keyboard warriors like you are going to light her up, so she's trying to be careful.
It could be, could be. I think we could have just, I don't know.
We have no food in our house. I am absolutely starving.
Oh, wait, I got to rewind that
We
one.
have no family 6-person group chat would be taken out of context and make me look like I don't really care that my daughter is crazy. I also got text one day. We have no food in our house. I am absolutely starving. You are the worst mother ever. And you know what I did? I ignored it. She was mad we didn't have the right kind of chicken ramen. When we have 85, I like the number 85. When we have 4 other flavors of ramen, and there's about 100 other things she can eat. And I knew she's not going to starve to death, but taken out of context, it makes me look like a neglectful mother.
Right?
I mean, I'm just thinking somebody's probably done referred her to CPS at this point, because get that girl her chicken ramen. You know what I'm saying?
Look, here's the thing. Simultaneously, at this point, I'm tired of hearing about this woman's personal life and her kids and her struggles and all that. But on the other hand, it's incredibly relatable because even as old as my ass is, I can still remember being a teenager or whatever, going, there's nothing in this house to eat. And nothing doesn't mean nothing. There's cabinets full of stuff. There's just nothing you want to eat. I
Mhm.
still have that problem to this day. I'll tell my wife there's nothing to eat. Well, there's a pantry and there's the big extra pantry cabinet and there's a refrigerator and the freezer in the basement. It's just nothing I want.
Yeah, sure.
And
First world problems.
I could totally see, what she's saying. If somebody pulls a message like that out where your kid texted you and said they were starving and there was no food in the home and you had just ignored them, I still don't quite get why we're going. I just have never heard an attorney use so many personal anecdotes before.
She's put a lot of her own personal existence in this closing. That's for sure.
Right.
Context, it makes me look like a neglectful mother. And when I'm driving home from court every day, I'm getting messages, will you at least call back? And I don't, because I know what they want is for me to run through the McDonald's drive-through and bring everyone a Coke. I do stop and get myself a Coke, but I am not getting a round of drinks every day for everyone. And I've realized it's easier to not answer the phone.
That might be one of my favorite moments, the whole closing that I watched, was whenever she was like, "And they want me to stop and get a Coke," and like, "I'm not going to. I'll get one for me, but not."
Right.
Uh,
Right, like, I was tracking along with her pretty good there, and she's like, "The you could take this out of context and make it seem like I'm completely ignoring my children, but they just want me to stop and get them Cokes at the drive-thru, and I'm not doing it. No, I'm gonna stop and get myself one." What?
it's like, no wonder they don't wanna hang out with you.
But, like you said, I mean, I guess at least she's honest, but again, like, how much do we need to know about you?
She
Yeah.
did call him. Specifically, she called him back at 7:24, and they had a 19-second phone call. If it was 19 seconds, it most likely was, "I'm on my way home. We'll talk when I get home."
Is she testifying there?
It's interesting, right?
She says it was a 19-second phone call. Okay, fine. That's probably in evidence.
Yeah.
But isn't she I mean, how does she know,
Well, to be fair though,
say
she
it
said
was
most likely it is. She didn't say he said or she said. She's saying most likely. I think that's I don't think that's so bad. That's okay. I think that's all right.
So one day they get in an argument. And I'll tell you what, those kind of arguments in a heartbeat could have me sitting in her chair. And
There
while
we
the
go.
officer testified and played games with me that he's not sure this is the best evidence against mother, you better believe if they had better evidence, they'd be up here showing stronger and better evidence.
Okay, I think the last part of that to me sounds like completely fair game. That if the prosecution had more evidence, it would be here. I think that's pretty smart thing to say. The first part I thought was pretty interesting where she says, they put the officer up there and played games with me that he doesn't know if this is the best evidence.
So what do you think is interesting about or what do you take issue with that?
I'm fascinated by the her saying the officer got up there and played games with me. I mean, that's I don't know, it just sounds to me like she's, accusing him of being
Mm,
less than, open and honest. I don't know.
I didn't watch that particular cross examination, but I to me that could be as simple as she's asking him questions and he's sort of trying, he's answering the questions, but he's not volunteering or he's not. I, that's if she had said, he lied to you on the stand. Okay, that's problematic. But she said, "Oh, he's playing games." Well, maybe that's just you've seen these exchanges before where there's a cross examination and the lawyer's asking a question and the witness is just sort of bristling at every single thing and um trying to be cute, like not lying, but being a difficult witness. So when she says, "Oh, he played games," I don't know what happened. I didn't watch it, but that's what is conjured up in my mind is this idea that the witness just wasn't exactly helpful to what she was asking and maybe did some, oh, I don't know, could be, I don't know, it's possible. Sure, yeah, that's possible. Instead of just
Perhaps
saying yes.
perhaps the difference is that I would sort of expect the defense attorney in their closing to say that the witness was, um, that this witness said this to you, and as you may recall, when I questioned him, it was difficult to get answers, or he was evasive,
Oh,
or something
yeah,
like
yeah,
that.
yeah. Yeah, I see, but
And again, this might be part of her genius that she's using like real people terminology of he was playing games with me. Maybe it's genius.
yeah, the closings that I've seen, I think the better ones, they, don't use legalese. They use words people understand. They talk about memes. They make it relatable. Instead of the way you put it was more eloquent, but everybody understands what you mean when you say, "Oh, he was playing games." Um, but and you said on her website, it says she's a different kind of defense attorney. So there you go.
She different, yeah.
It's obvious from the evidence in trial, and you may find it to be a reasonable doubt, that the Crumbley son was a skilled manipulator and they didn't realize it. He's not sick. He doesn't have a mental illness. He's had no history of hallucinations. He has never shown his parents signs of mental illness. He certainly never showed signs of mental illness wanting to get a gun. No parent would purchase a weapon if they believed their child had mental illness.
No parent. That's really where she lost me on that one, was no parent would, get their kid a gun if they believed they had mental illnesses. Maybe it's just by virtue of my life and career and these cases that you keep exposing me to, but, uh, the no parent? Really? No parent?
Yeah, there's some pretty bad parents out there. And I think that's like she should have just said no parent who cares or whatever, but she's trying to broaden it to everybody. But I will say to give her some credit, right? In this clip that you just put up, like that's to me, that's where her argument should be. She's making some hay in pointing out all the things that call into question these elements that are going to be needed to prove involuntary manslaughter, right? This notion that the son was such a skilled manipulator that this was completely not on their radar, that she says doesn't have any of this history that would uh call anything into question. I mean, those are the points that you should be hammering home on, like, and that's where my concern is her, what we'll call, sort of personal life stories and jury nullification, and it could be you if you let them convict the defendant. All of that I felt like just diluted the point, or when I say point, I mean the sharp part of this argument, that the state hasn't proved its case against her client. So that's my personal thought. But this section, this clip you just showed, I thought generally that's the kind of arguments that she should be making.
Right. No, I agree. I had a little bit of a difficulty relating when you got to the no parent, and again, that could be my personal history, my personal life experience, but I thought that was a little bit weird, and again, in all fairness, remember, I'm just showing you some clips of the things that caught my eye, so there was more discussion about the points that you're talking about that were necessary.
Yeah, yeah, and I agree with you. My guess, but words matter. When she said no parent, I think what she should have said was, no caring parent, or no parent who, you know, I don't know, like something to when you use those broad statements, right? No parent. Well, yeah. What about what's his name? The DC sniper. We did the episodes on that, right? Like he was a parent, and he bought his kid a gun and trained him how to use it and turned him into a yeah. So
Right.
uh, not great, not great.
You put my text up there and showed every time I told my mom that one of my kids was acting depressed or weird. I guess my favorite word is moody these days. It would look like my kids were complete lunatics. And again, my text would read worse because I say things like, I think my daughter's psychotic. So it's
Have
Uh,
you ever sent that in a text?
I personally try very hard not to put anything in text that I wouldn't want on the 5 o'clock news, and that I wouldn't want to have to read in a deposition. So I put very little of anything interesting in text, honestly.
Interesting, interesting.
absolutely not credible when a witness from the school, like Mr. Hopkins or Mr. Ejak, gets up on the stand and says, even if a kid is very sick, we cannot force them to go home. That is not true. And as parents with common sense, you should know that's not true. Because when my kids are puking, my kids' school will not let them be there. And when they have a temperature, not only can they not be there, but my children's school is always nice enough to remind me they can't be there for the next 24 hours, which means they can't be there the next day either.
Okay, that sounded like the most ignorant thing I have ever heard an attorney say. It sounded like one of those arguments that you have or hear from people that as soon as they say it, you're like, okay, I don't really believe anything you have to say from this point on because clearly you don't understand logic and reality. Because you're going to say, well, it can't be true that the school would do this because at my kid's school, they do this. I know, I've been there. Well, maybe their kid's school's different. What?
Yeah, so and that's honestly, this is where I almost feel like it's more problematic to make it about her personal life experience, whatever. Because the reality is, I think most schools, if a kid is throwing up, they're going to call you and ask you to come get your kid, right? I think that's pretty typical. Maybe not at every school, but I feel like that's probably a common thing. So had she, instead of getting into, well, this is my experience, and so it must be the same way there, if she had just said, uh, you know, well, is that, they testified this way, but, when a kid in school is throwing up, what does the school do? The school calls and they ask, they tell the parents to come pick up the kid. So you would think in a situation like this,
She's she started that with this witness is not credible because he said this and it's not true because eh, 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 that the school can't make them go home because at my kid's school when my
mhm.
kid's sick, I don't get that at all.
Yeah, it's problematic. And again, just to kind of back up and think through fundamentals. So if you want to make this argument in closing, or the right way or the best way to do this, I should say, the best way to do this would be when you have that witness on the stand to say, to ask questions about, well, if you have a student and they're puking, are they, do you make them go home? Or are they allowed to stay? And then when you get to your closing argument, instead of this speculation and talking about your kid's school and whatever else, like you're saying, you're comparing apples to oranges. You can say, well, he told you they couldn't make a student leave, yet he also told you that when a student's throwing up, then they'll ask the parents to come get them and they'll make them go home because they're puking. So, you know,
Right, or
why?
ask, "What's the policy?" Call in the
Yeah,
superintendent, call in the principal, call in the some kind of administrator, whatever. Heck, if you
yeah,
put all 4 of them on the stand, you might get 4 different answers, and then that's gonna look great for your client.
yeah, exactly. Instead of this, my personal experience at whatever school my kids go to or went to. Yeah, no,
Yeah,
you're right.
that was a big turnoff personally for me.
Brian's testimony in this case absolutely creates reasonable doubt. When Brian Maloche testified, there's no question he was inconsistent. And I would submit to you that there was no reason law enforcement needed to interview him for 2 hours, 1 hour, and then 3 hours. But over time, the police certainly caught on to the fact that the more you ask Brian the same question over and over, and he realizes he's not giving the answer you like, he changes it. And while the prosecution tries to make it sound like, well, he didn't want his affair outed, from the very beginning, he told them he was having the affair with Mrs. Crumbley. That was not something that ever changed. It wasn't until the third interview when they started talking about his pension, talking about his job, that he felt pressure. He agreed with the word pressure, and he agreed with the word veiled threats, although he did take it back later, that the police wanted him to say something bad about Mrs. Crumbley. And I would submit to you that they probably did that to all of the witnesses in the case.
That's a heck of a charge, isn't it?
Yeah, I would not. I don't think I would want to. I wouldn't want to go that far unless I knew unless there was that had been brought up in the trial.
It was interesting to me that she starts off saying, basically, the police pushed this guy till they figured out he was malleable, and
Mhm,
then they pressured him and made some
mhm.
veiled threats and got him to say what they wanted, which sounds to me like she's accusing them of the prosecution then of suborning perjury, and then says that the prosecution probably did it with all the witnesses.
Yeah, I think she was. I don't. I think it was okay until she got to that last part. She's like, well, so they probably did it with everybody. What? I mean, I think you got to have more than just your gut. Now, could you say, based on what maybe if you've established that these things did occur with this one person, and I'm not saying they did or didn't, I don't know. But if you've established that, then I think it's fair to ask the jury, you know, hey, you heard this, this happened with that, you have to ask yourself, is this the only witness that happened with, right? That's a way that you can frame it, and you're not saying they did it with everybody, but you're asking the jury a question that basically gets to the same end result,
Right.
without an accusation. See, questions are powerful because questions lead you to come to a conclusion without making a statement. And but that's it seems like semantics, but it matters, right? And that's where but she different. So okay.
But Brian Maloche was the one who admitted to it. And when Mr. Keast got back up there and asked him more questions, Brian got right back in line like he was supposed to and told them exactly what he knew they wanted to hear. Brian is a terrible witness. He said he had memory problems. And quite frankly, when he's testifying that he knows that the gun was in the car that day of the shooting, we all know no one thinks that's true. Mrs. Crumbley testified and explained the day the gun was in the car. Brian's just wrong. And when Brian testified that Brady was gone and he believed Brady died or committed suicide, I would submit to the jury that Brian is just an idiot and has no clue.
There's your name calling.
Yeah, I don't
He
even.
knows nothing. He's wrong. We all know that's wrong. And he's just an idiot and has no clue.
Yeah. I mean,
Look,
this.
it's
Uh,
colorful. And one of my favorite lines, and I wish every attorney could use it, is in My Cousin Vinny when they say you're a witness and Vinny, walks up there, click, click, click on the hardwood floor there and points to the witness or whatever, or the prosecutor, and says, everything that guy just said is bullshit. And then walk back and sat at his chair. But I don't think you're allowed to do that, are you?
I mean, listen, you can do anything. It's just what are the consequences going to be, right? So you do it in the wrong courtroom, and you might be in a holding cell for the rest of the day or a week. Um,
Like My Cousin Vinny, yeah.
Yeah, calling. Yeah, I mean, okay, everybody's different, and there's different types of lawyers, and they have different levels of comfort with certain things and whatever. And uh, yeah, that ain't
Do you
for
think
me.
do you think the judge here, look at the judge. Do you think she's looking over the prosecution like, "Are you gonna object?" Or
Her eyes to me look further. Honestly, it looks like she's looking more like where the jury probably is.
okay.
And that could just be to just, who knows? I mean, there could be a juror making a face. There could be somebody falling asleep. The
Alright.
jury juries are entertaining. I think it just looks to
Or
me like
laughing.
yeah, or they could be laughing. Yeah, it looks like they're further over than the prosecution.
Alright, I was just curious if you could read anything having spent so much time in courtrooms that I was overlooking.
No, and honestly, I mean, if at this point the prosecution hasn't objected, good lord, I remember before this point in the closing, I got to a place where I thought, well, if they haven't objected at this point, they're just not going to object unless she does something absolutely unhinged. Um, so there you go.
Alright.
But it's clear that Brian Maloche has been put on a mission, which is you're coming into court, you've got some things hanging over your head, and we want you to take a position against Mrs. Crumbley.
Isn't she saying there that the prosecution is extorting the witness?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I don't, this area is,
Alright, too
So
fuzzy.
giving him little bits of information is particularly dangerous because he's not the sharpest. And that's what the prosecution did. They used him to their advantage. They're at the urgent care because some little mole on his back changed colors when she's applying sunscreen.
He had a mood mole.
yeah, he did.
Myself as a hypervigilant mother, and I've never noticed any moles on my kid's back. And I must need to go home and look. Because when I look at the actions of Mrs. Crumbley, she actually pays far more attention to that kind of thing and other things than I do. I could easily be sitting in her chair. Ultimately,
We're getting the theme there, aren't we?
Yeah, and so what I think she's done is, okay, it clearly violates the golden rule. I mean, it's the poster thing to say you just as easily could be sitting in Miss Crumbly's chair. It doesn't quite so clearly, but it does, in my mind, violate the golden rule to say I could, and you're putting yourself into it, and I don't like that at all personally. But that I think that yeah, that's her theme. That's what she's done is right. Like it could be me, and if it could be me, it could be you. That's the takeaway.
his braces on his teeth. Then he's a bad brusher, so she's going to the extent of getting the braces off his teeth so he can get the cavities fixed. 13 cavities. I would go crazy on my kid. And she's just doing each thing she needs to do as a hypervigilant mother. And yes, a hypervigilant mother can have a drink once in a while. I'm a hypervigilant mother, and I not only have a drink once in a while, but sometimes I've been known to have 2 or 3 or maybe a bottle.
Drinking habits aside, she does confuse me because I feel like there are parts in this where she paints herself one way and then a little bit later, like paints herself the exact opposite way. Like here,
I'm a hyper vigilant mother. I have no idea if they have moles or not. I don't pay any attention to who my kid's talking to on video games. He has a cell phone. I don't look at his text messages, but I'm a hyper vigilant mother.
yeah, I was like, wait a second, you have spent this whole time being like, I'm a normal mom, and now I'm a mother who likes to drink a bottle of wine every once in a while. Okay, all right,
Right.
do you?
I hate spending the day with my kid doing stupid stuff.
Right, and they hate me too, and I don't blame them, like, because I don't get them Coke from McDonald's.
Right.
Oh, Lord have mercy.
And I do the same thing for my kid. He likes to go to skate parks. I would rather do anything but go to the skate park. But I sit there and watch and say, oh, that was amazing. And all I hear is, Mom, watch this. Mom, watch this. Mom, watch this. And I would rather do anything else.
How do you think that kid's gonna feel? You know someone at school is gonna tell him about this.
Oh, I mean, that's a TikTok. That's a TikTok going around his school right now.
And look, I am not disagreeing with the woman as a parent who has attended some of the most inane things.
Yeah,
You know,
we've all been there.
your kids have different interests, and I don't know whether it's they're telling you all about SpongeBob or Pokemon or whatever the heck else that you don't understand. Like, I get it, but number one, we're back to and I assume the whole theme here is to draw a very strong parallel between her and the defendant, which seems a
Mhm.
little weird. But then, say something like that her poor kids, you know,
Yeah, that's
your
she
mom
just
doesn't shower.
right?
She
I mean, she's
doesn't
putting it all out there.
she hates going with you to the skate park.
She ain't buying you a Coke, and
Right.
you put your bits and pieces out there. She's oh,
Poor kids.
Showing
yeah.
the pictures of the messy house was just not necessary. And the prosecution explained to you they weren't trying to prove she had a messy house, but much of it was just so unnecessary that I would suggest they are trying to make her look bad. They do kind of make her look a little bit like a hoarder. If you saw pictures of my house right now, like a snapshot in time, you'd be just as horrified. I've been so busy getting ready for this trial, ready for all the fun we've had in the court and through these last few weeks. I still have my Christmas trees up. I was complaining to my husband the other day, oh my God, we still have our Christmas trees up. This is embarrassing. And he said, hey, Shannon, we still have ceramic pumpkins up. And I realized, oh yeah, all of our fall decorations are out too. And right now I have piles of laundry all over. My kids over Christmas break put together stacks of stuff I need to take to the Salvation Army. I have donations of my own that need to go. My house right now, if they did a search warrant today, would look just as bad as Mrs. Crumbley's. And it says nothing about me parenting my child. If anything, when I come home from work, I make a deliberate decision. All right, listen, I can run around this house for 3 hours and try to get as much as I can done. Or I can sit on my couch and watch old episodes of the Kardashians with my daughter. And I believe my time is better spent hanging out with her, watching trashy TV than cleaning up my house because I get a chance to spend time with her. And Mrs. Crumbley was the same kind of mom. She was waiting until the holidays to have more time. She said she was going to clean her son's room. I would be screaming that I would make my son clean his room. You can.
There's a
Uh,
lot. There's a lot there.
yeah, that was kind of a long one, but it was all sort of part of the same anecdote that she was going with. The first thing that jumps out at me, of course, is the look she gave her, and not gave her, but the look on her
Mm-hmm.
face when she said, "She's kind of a hoarder."
Yes, she is like it is trashy. Well, and
And hey, my house is trashy too.
what kills me though, like the look and the comment, and then in the background you have just this mountain of what looks like incredibly disorganized paperwork, even though I'm sure it's not. But it just looks, it kind of set the scene for everything she was saying. It's, oh
Yeah, and she's
man.
got the third pile up there on that, podium.
Yeah, oh, I guess she's saying the defendant would prefer to watch the Kardashians with her son. Uh,
Okay, that is the part that I think was probably incredibly relatable, especially for the working moms that might be on the jury.
right. No, I mean, and hey, I can relate too. I like some good trash TV. I'll be the first. Now, not the Kardashians. I draw the
Well,
line there, but um, we all like to have our mindless veg out Netflix time. So you're right. That was incredibly relatable. But there's this weird uh, uh, dynamic in her closing where she kind of bounces back and forth between like competing concepts that just make it a little bit hard to track with.
yeah, I think what she's really saying there is the quality time is more important than the clean house, I guess is sort of what she's trying to get to there. But still with this parallel of she tells you something that the prosecution has said about the defendant, and then
Mhm.
she tells you how I do the same thing or worse, and here's why. It's because of this, value thing or because what they're talking about doesn't matter.
Mhm.
Wild,
Yeah.
huh?
Yeah.
Find reasonable doubt in the fact that the police officers are very, very biased in this case. There is no doubt this is one of the most awful situations any one of them have ever been involved in. But it's also very clear they have a narrative that Jennifer Crumbley is responsible. And when they came in here and took that witness stand, they were going to mess with me on questions that were so stupid. Like this ATF agent telling me he doesn't know if teenagers could lie. Everyone in the
Mm.
room knows a teenager could lie. That was a low ball. Just answer the question. When you have an ATF agent that can't even get on the stand and answer a question that's common sense, that should speak volumes. That there's a narrative they've been directed to get out and they have an agenda.
Okay. This makes the thing earlier about playing games make a lot more sense. And honestly, with that concrete example, I completely agree with her using that reference. So if you have a witness, in this case, an agent, who you ask a simple question like, isn't it possible that teenagers sometimes lie? Or don't teenagers sometimes lie? And realistically, everybody knows the answer to that question is, well, yeah, it's possible. Sure, sometimes, and that's all you need to do in that situation. But you have a situation where this particular witness is trying to just fight you on it, right? Oh, well, I don't know, I'm not qualified to answer that, I don't have an answer, I don't know, I'm not sure. They kind of beat around the bush, or they just won't concede anything, even if it's a simple fact that everybody can agree to, but they're just being difficult with you on the stand. I think that's a perfect example of where it makes sense in a closing argument to say, oh, the cop was, or this witness, they were playing games. Yeah, they were. And honestly, in those situations, it makes the witness look worse because you're refusing to concede or acknowledge something that everybody agrees to because you're just wanting to be difficult or argue with the attorney. So in the end, it really just makes it kind of impugns your own credibility. Um, so yeah, so that makes me really think that her reference earlier, where she said, all he's playing games, given the example she gave us, that's actually how the testimony went. If those were the sorts of answers to the sorts of questions she was asking, then yeah, I think that's a fair thing for her to say.
Then what about there at the end where she basically makes it sound like it's all a coordinated effort?
Okay,
Yeah,
so
go back the last 10 seconds.
yeah.
Question that's common sense, that should speak volumes. That there's a narrative they've been directed to get out and they have an agenda.
Okay, so what I take from that is not so much there's a conspiracy to just like, whatever, but more there's a political or whatever kind of motivation from up on high that this is how we're going to handle this case. Dicey, but given that she does things different, okay, all right. I personally, she's not coming out and saying, "Oh, they're doing this and it's wrong," and yada yada yada. I think she's leaving enough leeway that this is her argument, that this is why the testimony was this way. This is why they wouldn't give you a straight yes or no answer on an easy yes or no question was because they didn't want to concede anything because they had this direction to handle this case a certain way. A little bit of a stretch. I don't know if I would do it, but I don't think that's necessarily the worst thing in the world.
For some jurors, the message that she's tying together here and putting a bow on is that you have the entire weight of the whole government, the state, coming after a mom that was just doing her best.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's there. You just said her closing.
It, is that what you want? You could be that mom. I could be that mom.
I text, I am going to drive home from my office right now.
This is the, I did have it in here. This is one of the texts that was brought into evidence between her and the defendant just before they were captured
Okay.
or arrested.
I'm going to drive home from my office right now. I'll give you a call in about 45 minutes so I can get all of the bond factor information written down for you for Marielle and me. I'm asking for bond information so we can go to the court in the
Your Honor,
morning.
I'm going to object. There's a prior ruling. She cannot be a witness. That was already dealt with.
Sorry, I thought I was arguing off the evidence they admitted.
Well, you can argue off the evidence.
Okay. So they say at 7:37, okay, we'll be waiting. It's a gross over.
So I don't really understand what happened there. I heard the judge say sustained 3 times.
And I heard her say, it sounded to me like she said, you already went off the evidence. Like, okay, let's keep on going. So typically then that's her cue to like, just move it on along and stop what you're
I
doing.
thought what the attorney said was, I thought I was arguing from the evidence, or I thought I was arguing off the evidence that they admitted.
Yeah.
And she said, you are allowed to, I thought, well, let's go back and hear it again because I might have messed up.
Maybe I heard it wrong.
Prior ruling. She cannot be a witness. That was already dealt with.
Sorry, I thought I was arguing off the evidence they admitted.
Well, you can argue off the evidence.
Okay. So
Did you hear that? She said, I thought I was arguing off the evidence they admitted. And the judge said, well, you can argue off the evidence.
Oh, okay. See, that's
But I
funny.
didn't know what that meant. Yes, you can, but what you're doing is not, or, oh, I see. And then come back and say, to that extent, it's overruled, or any clarification.
So I think what we have here, and it's kind of muddy, and they're trying to do it without putting this all in front of the jury, but without taking a break, because that would also be whatever. So what you have is it looks like these text messages that were between them. Those have been admitted into evidence, it sounds like. And so she can give her closing on, these were admitted, this is what they say. What I think she was starting to veer into, that the prosecutor took issue with, was she was starting to veer into giving commentary on, because she's the one who was a party to these. This is why, and this is why she was contacting me, and this was the purpose of this, as opposed to just commenting on, here are these messages, and
Right.
maybe offering an argument to, well, you could interpret this message the way the way the state has presented it, but you can also interpret these messages to mean blah blah blah, without getting into like, well, I said, and she called me or she texted me this, because where you're editorializing the evidence as somebody who was part of that communication. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's well, for one thing, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, it's pretty raw. It's pretty rare to have any communication between the defendant and their attorney admitted.
It's
That
unusual. Yeah, it's not going to be commonplace that that's going to happen for sure.
So that's kind of rare. And so the prosecution was arguing that, hey, she's not allowed to testify. And that's what you're saying is one thing, that we've got these messages and she can acknowledge them, she can reference them, she can summarize her opinion overall, but her explaining message by message, this is what I meant and this is what was going on and whatever, that kind of amounts to testifying, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yep.
they say at 7:37, okay, we'll be waiting. It's a gross overstatement to keep saying that the gun was his gift. It's very clear it was something bought for him to use at the shooting range, something that may one day ultimately be truly just his. But it's just like any of us giving our kids a laptop to use, a cell phone to use, a car to use, a jet ski. I have a friend that has kids, they have snowmobiles. Nothing different. It doesn't really mean the kids just have free access to all of that stuff. It comes with conditions, rules, and parameters.
Why? Because that's her experience in her life? Because that's what it sounds like she's telling us.
This argument was very weird to me because, you get into some different contexts, but if you've got a teenager, which some people I know do, and they are driving a car that you own, and they're on whose insurance are they on, right? They're on your insurance, and who's going to be on the hook if they go out and, as a 16, 17-year-old, if they go out and do something stupid with that car. Now, criminal liability, that's another ball game, and that's where I think she really needed to kind of hone in on that. But when she started talking about all these different ways that, jet skis and whatever, I just felt like a lot of this was not disorganized because clearly she had her rainbow colored index cards to keep herself on track with the way she wanted to present her argument.
I think
But
the point she was trying to make here is to counter the argument that, well, these parents bought this 15-year-old kid a gun and gave it to him as a Christmas present, and that in itself is problematic. So I think the argument she was trying to make is that while you may purchase a gift for your child, or you may claim something as theirs, it doesn't mean that they have completely unlimited, unregulated, unfettered access to it. As in this case, she explained that while this was technically his gun, his Christmas present, it was kept locked up. And it was when he went with his mom and dad to the gun range, that's where he was supposed to be using it. So I think that was kind of her point, which sort of went a little sideways when she talked about you get him a laptop.
mhm.
Well, I think she's kinda already told us that in her house, it doesn't sound like she's paying attention to what's going on the laptop,
Yeah, I
but
mean, bits and pieces flying everywhere.
right, maybe with the jet ski and the snowmobile, it's not like if you get your kid, okay, it doesn't mean you can take it out and use it anytime you want, whenever you want, no rules. I
Mm,
think that's where she was going with it,
yeah,
but where it kinda lost me was in the, "Here we go again with my kids, my friends' kids."
yeah, for sure.
And implying that there's some universal rule that just because you give your kid a gift doesn't mean it doesn't come with rules, boundaries, and limitations. Because there are plenty of parents out there that absolutely that's exactly what it means.
Yeah, for sure.
This is a case where the prosecution made a charging decision way too fast. It was motivated by obvious reasons for political gain and media attention. And we know that because on 11/1, when the shooter was arraigned, the shooter was on Zoom, and so were the parents, and the media was aware. And when Mr. and Mrs. Crumbley were charged, and there was a swear to at the court, the media was all there, but guess who wasn't? Mr. or Mrs. Crumbley. Mrs. Crumbley testified she didn't even know there was going to be an arraignment, but the media knew. And then the prosecution came out with a big press conference announcing it.
So is it cool to say like this is all motivated by politics and media attention?
Yeah, I think that
I really don't know. I'm not judging this attorney because if that's fair game, then and she believes that's what's going on, then go for it.
did you notice how she sets that up and she makes that statement, she argues that, and then she says, "And here's why we know that." And she offers, which I'm not sure that I completely follow this right, but this idea she offers as proof or evidence of that, that the media is aware of this stuff even without the defendants knowing about it, right?
Right.
Um, So, the fact that she backs it up with something I think is important. I think where you get in trouble is if it's like a whole cloth. If you just say that and there's absolutely nothing that you can point to try to tie that in, then I think you have a problem. But okay, if you have a case like this where, oh well, I don't know about this particular case. So hypothetically, if you had a case where the prosecutor's holding press conferences and making splashes in the newspaper and inviting the media and doing all this stuff, I think it's fair game to say, that they're like inviting all this media attention, that they're doing it for this publicity. I think that's fair, as long as there is some evidence to back that argument up.
All
Yeah.
right. And at this point, do you think the judge is up there texting her kids, "I'm not stopping to get you a Coke"?
Yeah, that's yeah,
I
she's
would
probably got her
say
iPad out, sure.
that the plan was never to let the Crumbleys turned themselves in, but to turn them into a big charade of looking like they're trying to flee when they absolutely weren't. There is nothing to prove that anything could have stopped a mass shooting when you're dealing with someone who is so manipulative and is a criminal and was a shooter in cold blood and pled guilty and took responsibility as an adult for his crimes.
I think I just included that in because it, I don't know, I guess it sort of breaks my heart a little bit. I understand what they're doing. I understand why they have to do it. Certainly, the defense was throwing shade on the shooter, her son, the defendant's son, as well as the husband. So, uh, the defense made it very clear in their arguments that, hey, it was the dad that was responsible for securing the gun. That was on him. That was his job. She also, here in this closing, she dumped on the dad a little bit when about them going to the school to meet the school staff when he made the drawing the day of the shooting, saying that yeah, there's nothing wrong with her asking him to go to the school. She worked this job. She had a career. He was just a DoorDash driver. He could go deal with it. um yeah, I didn't include that one here, but then there've been a couple times she's referred to the shooter, and I'm not the shooter's probably not getting any Christmas cards from anybody. No love lost there, but referring to him as the monster, the manipulator, the criminal, because of course he accepted a plea and took a life sentence, which is probably good for all the victims and families and everybody that they don't have to relive everything in court. It just sometimes I think it's interesting and unfortunate. And when James, the husband, is on trial here in a few months, I imagine his attorney will be, trying to blame the whole thing on Jennifer, Mrs. Crumley.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's pretty standard, typical. I mean, and you think about it, right? So, mom is on trial for involuntary manslaughter. The argument being that it was reasonably foreseeable that this was going to happen, that she basically allowed and put the pieces into place and didn't do anything when everything was in front of her, that this could and likely, or was at least seemingly likely to be able to happen, and did nothing to prevent it or stop it or get in the way. So a great defense to that is, well, I mean, this dude, he's manipulative and he planned this all out and he hid this stuff from them. And if you make him, and he's already pled guilty, right? He's already admitted to his role and his actions. That's a great argument. I mean, that's one, honestly, I feel like go further with that one. Highlight that even more. Now, maybe there's not enough evidence there to take it further. So this is as far as she can take it. I don't know. But yeah, to your point though, right? It's a kid. This is tragic. People died. It's awful. It's horrible. And so, yeah, to just take a minute and recognize like this situation sucks.
There's no winners here. Absolutely no winners.
You're going to see arguments between a married couple. When I read them, they read just like my husband and myself.
Here she's talking about the evidence that's going to go back into the jury room, and referring to how the prosecution cherry picked, but they're going to have all of the text messages and they can read through them instead of just seeing these things that were taken out of context. They can read all the text messages and see that it was just life.
Yelling and swearing at each other at times, and then the next message says, "Hey, what do you want for dinner?" And then we just move on, and that's just how life is.
Again, her own personal experience added in there.
I mean, it sounds like your house.
I mean, yeah, it would not be alarming to me to have that kind of, because that's what you do, when you're grown-ups and you're in a relationship with somebody, married or whatever, or co-parenting or whatnot. Yeah, you can be furious or be blowing off steam at each other, but at the end of the day, like, the kids got to be taken care of and everybody's got to eat and life goes on. And it's also because, like, if you know that this is an argument, this is a disagreement, we're both cranky, but at the end of the day, we're a team and we're going to be together, then, what's the problem? So
Yeah.
there's nothing wrong with going to, fine, what do you want for dinner then? Because that's just an understood that, we're coming together. This isn't the end of the world. We're just
Yeah.
snarky with each other at the moment.
I am asking that you find Jennifer Crumbley not guilty, not just for Jennifer Crumbley, But for every mother who's out there doing the best they can, who could easily be in her shoes, for every parent doing the best they can, who could easily be in their shoes, for every parent that has snippets of text messages that could be read and make them look like horrible monsters, for every parent that has fights with their kid on text message that also could make them look like terrible parents, for every parent that's ever had a hobby and has not spent 24/7 with their child. That should not be held against parents. For any parent that's
What she's referring to there is that Jennifer, the defendant, had horses. And I don't know if you know anything about horses or people that have horses, but everyone that I've ever known that's been involved with horses, I think it takes more time than children.
It's fair.
Fair.
ever had an affair or spent time communicating on an affair, that says nothing about how much you care about your child or your expectation of whether or not.
Yeah, so as we've discussed, it, was pretty open, and she's brought it up even in the closing that she was having an affair with this guy that had been her high school boyfriend, and then it came out toward the end of the trial that I guess they would hook up in the Costco parking lot about once a week for their adventures, and then when she would travel out of town for work, she would use some app, Adult Friend Finder or something, to find someone else to join them in their festivities.
So it wasn't just $1.50 hot dog and Coke she was going to Costco for, huh?
Oh, no, she had the gold membership,
Ooh.
and I don't oof.
They would commit a school shooting. And I'm sure you can see from my demeanor in trial, when the prosecution says something that I know I have an argument against, I get anxious. You can see a reaction, and I'm not going to do that. But I am going to tell you that as they argue, I will have many things that I wish I could get up and say, that's not true, and argue against. So what I would ask is that when you go back in the jury room and begin to deliberate, you think about and ask yourselves, what would Shannon Smith have said in response to the rebuttal where they get the last word? Now, during jury,
That to me was kind of brilliant what she did right there. That last part.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen a good defense attorney not do some version of that. And I've seen it from sort of the weaker, this is it. This is my last time to say anything. So, I don't get to get back up, and there's not much beyond that. And then one of the better ones I've seen, or maybe not better, but it was better. But one of the more dramatic ones I've seen was the criminal defense attorney in federal court who was from the South. I think she was from Georgia, and she sold it all the way. She said, when I don't want to stop talking, because when I stop talking, that's it. I don't get to get back up here. And she's holding on to the podium, and she starts to kind of slide down the podium, and she's like, I don't want to let go. If I know when I let go, that's it. I don't get to make this argument anymore. They get to say whatever they want, and I don't get to get back up here. So yeah, there's usually some version of that baked into, hey, just know that, I've got more things to say, but they get the last bite of the apple. So think about how you would, what my response would be. So yeah, it was a good way to leave it off.
Yeah, I think she did all right with that one. I mean, so I'm still left with the question at the end of the day, at the end of the thing, like, is she a nutcase or a genius? I don't know.
Hey, I'm practical. So I would say my answer to that question is her client convicted or acquitted? And there's your answer. So I guess we'll have to come back and see. But I don't know about you. I really need to go get a Coke from McDonald's. So
I also want to say, God bless her husband.
the office manager.
I think, here, and I don't mean this disparagingly, but clearly she's a handful.
No comment. I feel like no good will come out of that. I'm not saying anything. Uh,
And that's okay.